Okay, let's get started. I appreciate all of you being here. It is an encouragement to me, especially like for those of you who have traveled. That shows the dedication, the devotion that we just talked about, right, of setting your kids up for success. Our focus is we, not me, right? We've heard that a couple of times already, and that's a great thing. And that ties into our theme very well. That's not me. I don't know. That's a Rumley kid, I think. I know I'm standing between you and supper, right? I know that, right? So, but I'm going to get through what I've got prepared. So why is this important, right? We're going to talk about how to pursue and build and maintain those relationships, those genuine relationships, right? For our kids. That's what we're focusing on. And how important it is to God that we truly care for one another. It's not just words, right? So Martin and Gerald have done an excellent job talking about patience and devotion. And teaching our kids how to be patient and devoted to one another leads to the last topic today, okay? It's bearing one another's burdens. How do we teach our kids to bear one another's burdens? And that's a heavy thing to do, okay? It's foundational of having that patience, being devoted to one another is going to equip our kids. And we're going to talk about our kids and us today, right, of how we do that. It's something heavy to think about, at least it is for me. So we designed this weekend around some core truths, okay? When we obey the gospel, we enter into a special relationship with God, and as we've talked about, with others. And those relationships, they are special, and they matter to God, and guess what? They matter to us, or they should, okay? And it's been said before, those relationships, whatever they are, right? Peer-to-peer, parent-to-parent, or parent-to-child, spouse-to-spouse, they require work. In order to thrive, they require work and needs everyone's involvement. So our key passage today is, for my section, is Galatians 1 and 2. Galatians 6, verses 1 and 2. If you want to turn there, I'm going to read that. Galatians 6, 1 and 2. Brethren, if anyone is caught in trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each looking to yourself, so that you too will not be tempted. Verse 2, bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfilling the law of Christ. Okay? I think it's important for us to take a half a step back and just look at the book of Galatians for just a minute and why it was written. Okay? It's important to know that you had Jewish and Gentile conversions trying to get along, to worship together. So Paul wrote this, especially around faith, but concerning justification of faith, and that was to be apart from the law of Moses, right? They were facing issues because of that. They were legalistic, okay? There were Jews who insisted that the law of Moses still be kept. In particular, you had to be circumcised as a requirement for the Gentiles to be saved. And that's just false, right? So Paul took time to write the epistle to those churches in Galatia to try to set the record straight, if you will, right? They were struggling with legalism. Jesus is now the door to salvation, but they had put a screen door on the outside. You got to go through the screen door, the law of Moses, to get to where you're going. Second, judgmentalism. I think that's a word, judgmentalism. Criticizing, complaining, and even condemning one for the views that they were having. Okay? So now, that's the setting for that. Let's go to Galatians 5, leading up to why Paul wrote this. Why are we to bear one another's burdens in chapter 6? And I'm going to read it. Gerald took part of it, but I think it's important to know what's leading up to that, because there is some language in here that is harsh. Verse 13, for you are called for freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but love and serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. But I say, walk in the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh. For the flesh sets his desire against the Spirit against the flesh. Skip down to verse 19. Now the deeds of the flesh are evident: immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, outburst of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions. Some of the stuff we've already talked about, right? Envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, and just as I have forewarned you, that you practice these things, you'll not inherit the kingdom of God. And then he turns a little bit, right? But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. Now those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions, with its desires. So let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. Okay? That helps set the stage for what comes in chapter 6. Along with that, in Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 through 4, Jesus spoke to the crowds and his disciples, saying, these scribes and Pharisees have seated themselves at the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they do and tell you and observe, but they do not do according to their deeds. For they say things and they do not do them. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but for themselves they are unwilling to move so much as a finger. Okay? So that's the kind of thinking, that's the kind of attitude that existed in these churches. So as we dive into those two verses, verses 1 and 2 of Galatians 6, the context refers to burdens. And those are challenges, those are weaknesses, those are sins, those are struggles of life. And bearing those burdens helps fulfill that law of Christ. I joked when I read that passage because it's part of this introduction of John 13, 34, 35. Okay? A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And by this, all men will know that you are my disciples, and you have love for one another. It's the phrase, so fulfill the law of Christ. That's what he's talking about. Okay? Bearing one another's burdens, whether those burdens are sins, illness, sickness, struggles in life that weigh us down, we demonstrate Christ-like behavior with love in action, right? Putting that love into action. That's the main point, what I want to talk about today. It reflects humility, compassion, and willingness to care for others. So, I try to come up with an illustration. So think about this. A child, whatever age, 8th grade, 9th grade, with a backpack on. And I said full of books, but I don't think kids tote backpacks to school anymore full of books, do they? That's what I was going to say. They probably have a personal laptop. They have a school laptop. They may have 1 or 2 iPads, 1 or 2 phones. You get the idea, right? A heavy weight. In their hands that day, they're carrying a school project. Lava volcano, whatever you want that to be, whatever you want that to look like. Or a new band instrument, right? You get the idea in your head. They're carrying a heavy weight. Another kid sees that, and guess what? Takes action. Offers to carry the backpack, offers to carry the school project in, offers to carry the new band instrument. And I'm not talking a flute, right? I'm talking a trombone, a baritone, something like that, right? You get the picture. That's putting this principle into action for whatever age that is, whatever that looks like. Okay? The one another commands found in the New Testament, we've talked about several already, that we're studying this weekend, are God's given direction on how to handle these for better, stronger, longer lasting relationships, not only for us as parents, but especially for our kids, getting that foundation set. And if you talk about bearing one another's burdens, I think it's interesting to look at the Greek. The word bear comes from the word bastazo, which means to carry, to take up, to even take away, or to carry off. And then the word burden Comes from the Greek word baros, B-A-R-O-S. What do you think that means? Heavy weight. Okay, it's a heavy weight. So when you put those two things together, bearing a burden means carrying off the weight of someone else. You're bringing some form of relief to your brother or sister. So with the definition that a burden is heavy and the one could not and should not carry alone, like sin, struggles of life, what are some things that make your kids, our kids' lives heavy? And maybe your life. What are some things? Shout it out. Busyness. I had that one. What about conflict with peers? We talked about that one earlier. What else? Okay, lack of self-confidence. Yes, comparison, especially today. Keep going. Pride. I didn't have that one. Anxiety. Pressure to fit in. What about as adults? What are some things that weigh us down? Yes. Competition. Finances. Relationships. So, yes. Excellent. I had problems in the home. That's right. Okay, with that in mind, how do you think they feel, or how do you think you feel under those heavy weights? Yeah. Yes, defeated, discouraged, deflated, lots of D words in there. Depressed. What else? Inadequate, yes. Trapped, exhausted. I'm dealing with this over and over. I'm exhausted. Just trapped under a weight that I cannot move. Okay? So God calls us as parents to disciple, to help teach, to encourage our kids to love and to serve in a way that Christ did in bearing one another's burdens. Okay? So let's talk about point number one. How do we do that? That's the expectation out of this class, right? Help you help your kids, and thereby helping each other. Because this is something we're all doing, right, as Christians. We want to teach compassion first through Christ's example. Teach compassion. How? Let me ask you this. What are some of the things that we can teach? I'll give you one. Math. We can teach math, right? What's something else we can teach? Yes, more, but I was thinking farming. I was teaching, some of the things we could teach is accounting. That'll break a horse. I raised my hand. Yes, we could talk about that. What else? We could teach the Bible, and we can teach others how to teach the Bible, right? What are some things that are much harder to teach? And I gave the answer in the point. Compassion, empathy. That word was used previously. This is where we're going to try to drive that home. I know that empathy or compassion is not an emotion, but you think about feelings. How do you teach someone feelings? Can you? Excellent. Yeah, compassion requires transformation sometimes of your heart. Some kids are born with that. Some adults have that. Others, you gotta push that. It requires a transformation of the heart and mind. Matthew 9:34 and 36. Okay, Matthew 9:34 and 6. Jesus, seeing the people, felt compassion for them because they were distressed. They were dispirited like a shepherd, like a sheep without a shepherd. Go back and look at the entire chapter of Matthew 9. It is filled with activity. Lots of healing. Raising a daughter who was supposedly dead. A woman with an issue of blood for 12 years. 2 blind men were healed. A demon-possessed man was healed. Okay? Verse 35, Jesus was going throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. And seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like a sheep without a shepherd. Jesus' heart for the people was not of judgment, right? It was of compassion. Philippians 2:3 and 4 brought out earlier, and I love that we have the Bible that is so instrumental. And these passages, right, go across all kinds of topics. What we just talked about today. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interest, but for what? The interest of others is what we're talking about. Okay? You can think of other examples. For time, I'm just going to list a few. Healing the sick, feeding the hungry. Matthew 14, Mark 7 and 8. Comforting the grieving and welcoming the outcast. Okay, there's a model here, such as the lepers, the tax collectors, etc. Compassion starts with seeing others how God sees them. They're valuable, they're loved, they're deserving of care, they're deserving of our bearing of their burdens. And for children and us as adults, learning compassion starts with awareness. Okay? So some practical steps. What does that mean? As a parent, how do I do that? First of all, model compassion. Share personal examples. I know that's not always easy. We're taught by our parents, we're taught by our peers, don't boast, don't brag. But sometimes you have to do that. Gerald talked about it. We have to be specific. Talk about a time where you, as a parent, or maybe you saw someone, you witnessed someone bearing someone's burdens. How did you help them? Then explain why, right? Why did I do that? How did that come about? And then involve your children in those same kinds of things. Writing a card, delivering a meal. We have so many opportunities to model that. Number 2, I call it teach prayerful empathy. Teach prayerful empathy. Have those open discussions with your kids about those in need. And sometimes you have to be specific. Relative to their age, whatever they're able to absorb, you'll be the judge of that. And you can start with the personal. Every week there's people in the personal that are among us that need our attention and need our help, right? Do they know them? If not, try to introduce them. And I know that's a struggle sometimes for the shut-in. There's a lot of people in our personal that are not here, but that's okay. You can still introduce them to those folks and their needs. And then what can we do to help? Be specific. Yes, ma'am. Excellent. And these do not have to be grandiose activities, right? Simple, but yet often. During the family devotions, ask your children to name people in their lives that might need help or prayer. And then emphasize that compassion begins in the heart, But it doesn't stop there. Action is required. Number 3, encourage small acts of kindness. Talked a little bit about this. Help your children do their own brainstorming. What can they do? What ideas can they come up with to help and serve others? Showing kindness, offering encouragement, inviting, welcoming, sit with me, especially those who might feel left out, offering to join in a Bible study, a game, whatever's going on, right? So now we have a foundation. Compassion like Christ. Number 2, train them to take action grounded or rooted in love. Train them to take action in love. James 2:17, faith by itself, if it doesn't have works, is dead. 1 John 3:18, little children, let us not love with word or tongue, but in deed, in action, and in truth. Okay? True love of others is more than words. It's demonstrated in action, and children and adults alike must understand that helping others involves stepping out of our comfort zones. In Matthew 11:28 and 30, we're introduced to a word. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So what's the word? Yoke. Okay? Everybody knows what a yoke is? How does this apply? I think it's important to be reminded of that. We know that term. We know what it looks like, the bar with the pieces of wood that go around. Typically at that time, it was 2 oxen. They would pull wagons, plows, move rocks, etc. What were they doing? Working together. And it's interesting, you do a little study on that they were often, for good reason, of the same size and equal strength. But what did they do? They got things accomplished that one couldn't do by themselves. Does that make sense? So think about that, because that's what we're doing. We're bearing one another's burdens throughout life. So practical steps in this section. Any questions so far? Comments? I'm trying to be mindful of our time. Provide opportunities to serve. Create family service projects that include visiting nursing homes. We have a standing invitation at this congregation for some shut-ins. Okay? Donating clothes to shelters. And that means taking time. Don't just say, hey, we're going to give away some clothes. And your kids go in there and they rumble through the closet. They go, I don't like this, and everywhere. They throw it in a pile. Be intentional about that, right? What does this mean? What are we doing? I'm not just getting rid of clothes so I can either hand it off to somebody more in need, right? I'm helping bear another's burden with this. What else? Did anybody think of another example? Talked about Bible studies, participating in the activities that are available, not only for this church, but maybe in their peer group. Create opportunities to serve in their daily lives, just at school, right? Looking around. Find that kid with the heavy backpack full of whatever it is. And then whatever age is appropriate, help them understand that we have to move into the messiness sometimes of people's lives. Okay? Turning away and claiming, that's not my responsibility. That is not Christ-like, it's not loving, and it's not biblical. How do we get them involved into the messiness of others' lives, whatever that looks like at the appropriate age? Number 2, equip them with tools. Teach them how to listen. We talked about that earlier. Listen to your kids and have them listen to others around them. How can I help? That should be the question that they ask. How can I help? Saying that opens a door for them to make a meaningful impact somewhere. And then ask questions on how and where there might be an opportunity of a friend who's sad, lonely, or struggling. Those kids are, our kids, your kids, they're intuitive, they're smart, they can see that. Encourage them, help them understand how to take action when they see that. Number 3, encourage consistency. Celebrate those acts of kindness that you see, no matter how small, and remind them that their actions please God. But also remind them that it's not a box-checking exercise. We're not doing this just because my parents want me to do it. You're trying to instill that Christ-like behavior so that they can bear one another's burdens at whatever level they're able to do, but certainly into adulthood, because that's what we need to be doing. And then when they face challenges, encourage their perseverance. Don't give up after the first try. Remind them that serving others isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And finally, caution them against what I say is too much. Okay? Weighing their own abilities against what is in front of them is important. They have to recognize when they need to involve others, with very few exceptions. We're not licensed counselors, right? And neither are our kids. So help them understand what is too much. And knowing when to ask for help, helping them find discernment in the situations that they're in. So, what are some attitudes that are necessary when bearing one another's burdens, such as compassion? What kind of attitudes do we need? Do our kids need? Yes, humility. We talked about a lot of them. Kindness, grace, joy, patience. How do we teach those? We model it, right? We talked about that. So what does it mean practically? What does it look like practically for us to do that? Awareness and initiative. What else? What does it look like? Offering to serve? What are some practical examples? I've got my answers. I want to hear yours. Yes. Give a listening ear. Okay. What else? Some of you have done this. What are your answers? Mm. Excellent. That's hard. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Otherwise, you're not modeling it, right? You're sending whatever, however that works. You're sending the wife on to church with the kids, and you're going to pick up those who need a ride. That's not modeling. It's like, well, they were doing it. I'm not a part of it. And I was going to tell you that story. I can't remember of the two folks that my kids got to see a lot of. Wow. But they still talk about that. The conversations that the two of them had. They were two individuals, and they would argue and discuss things in the second row. And my kids got to witness that. They still talk about that, right? Because we, as a family, went and picked them up and gave them a ride. Some of you are smiling because you know who I'm talking about, because I can't remember their name. I'm sorry. What's that? No. No. Yes. Oh. they were arguing. My kids still quote that because he was telling her something about her cooking, and she said, "Don't tell me I can't cook." And my kids will quote that in the kitchen when we're working through home projects. But they were. Who, do you remember? Abraham, yes. And yeah, I'm sorry, I can't remember. But that was like, no, she busted him. My kids are in the back seat, like I don't know if they're serious or playing or what. But she said, "Don't tell me I can't cook." So offering to serve, praying together, thinking through the problems, listening ear, offering encouragement, accountability. Anything else? On the negative side, be cautious about how we discuss others and the burdens that they are bearing. Right? That's cumbersome. And there can be a fine line between explaining and complaining. And our kids see that. Would you agree? Yeah, be careful about the things that we say, that we're offering encouraging things, and how might we help versus complaining. And then the tough question, how often do we complain about someone else's burden rather than looking for ways to help? Does anybody see that? Have you experienced that? I have. Like, man, can this person not just do X, Y, or Z? And they wouldn't be in this situation. That's not what I'm called to do. That's not the scriptures that we read earlier. I'm called to do things differently, to love, and to put that love into action. We all know it, but I'm going to talk about it just for a minute. The story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. The Samaritan was willing to stop. He was willing to act. He was willing to invest in someone that was almost a hated relationship, right? People that did not get along. It's hard for us to imagine that, but you see that in the world today. But that's a perfect example from Jesus' illustration. There was someone that was left for dead, and others of a religious sect, what do? They crossed over so that they wouldn't even have to look. Okay? But the Samaritan didn't just feel the compassion. He had that compassion. But what did he do? He acted. He invested time, effort, and resources in helping someone's need. Love is not just what we say, it's what we do. It's stepping into the needs of others with humility, with compassion, with love, and with consistency. Yes, ma'am. They still are. That's exceptional answer or example. And that shows what I was talking about a while ago. Don't be careful what you're saying, especially in the earshot of your kids, right? And I think that's also what I said a while ago is it's okay for you to have that example. It's okay for you to brag on others. It's okay to share that example. I mean, Amy's in her early 30s and she still remembers it. I mean, it's what? Okay, late 20s, sorry. But the point is, it's impacted her. And she can she can relate that to others. Okay? Anything else? That's a hand over here? Yes, ma'am. Yes, excellent. And again, the point is, let your kids see that somehow. Okay? And they can make that, you can make that real to them by even pointing out specific people. Anybody else? So as parents, we have a sacred responsibility to model this for our children. And we've talked about that. It's rooted in love and not just obligation. It should be on our hearts and on our kids' hearts to do it out of love. So we have compassion, now we have action. The third point is teaching them dependence on God. Teaching them dependence on God while bearing one another's burdens. Psalm 55 and 22 reads, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you." That's pretty clear. Okay? Teach your kids to depend on God while doing that. Not just us, but your kids depending on God. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. It can be overwhelming. Helping others can be overwhelming. If you've known that, if you got at your situation where you're helping someone and you felt like you couldn't get out of it, it can be overwhelming. They, as well as we, need to know that they're not alone. Removing, carrying others' burdens because we love, that's what the body of Christ does. Okay? We see that in God being the ultimate bearer of our burdens, and he's equipped us to serve. In doing so, without frustration, without complaining, without burnout, through his word and through the very people you're sitting by today, right? Leaning on one another to help others that need help more than you. So, practical steps. Number 1, teach them to pray for strength. When children face situations and they don't know how to help, encourage them to pray for wisdom and strength first, right? Model that. Gerald said it, I'm going to say it. Pray specifically. Pray specifically. Not just give me wisdom, give me strength. What does that mean? If you pray specifically, then you act specifically, right? And then you model it by praying with them and let them see that you rely on God as a parent in your moments of uncertainty. Missed a page here. Number 2, let me back up. You're praying with them, you're praying for them. Okay, we're commanded to pray. Ephesians 6:18, James 5:16, I believe those were on the board earlier. Every man has, even a man as strong as the Apostle Paul, ask for prayers. How encouraging is that? I mean, when you start naming your heroes of the Bible, Paul's always at the top of the list. But that man, that apostle, asked for prayers. That's, to me, is extremely encouraging. Number 2, point them to Scripture. Okay? Use verses about God's faithfulness to assure your children that he is with them. Philippians 4:13. It's an overused, sometimes, a lot of times out of context verse. I get that. But it's also after the words mean things. I can do all things through him who strengthened me. Philippians 4:13. Remind them of other appropriate scriptures, quoting the Bible. They need to hear, they need to read, they need to see the sufficiency of God in our lives. I lift my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Psalm 121, 1 and 2. Wow, I was going to 4. Real quick, practice the ministry of presence, being there. Job gets a bad rap, right? Job's friends get a bad rap. But for the first 7 days, what did they do? They were set there in silence, okay? Number 3, help them to surrender to the outcome of God. Help them surrender to the outcome to God. Those bigger issues in life, teach your children that their responsibility is to help and love, but God is the one who brings the lasting change. This can help them avoid feeling overly responsible for outcomes. So my encouragement to you this week, take intentional steps. The 3 things that we've talked about today, patience, devotion, and bearing one another burden. Take intentional steps to model these with your kids. Remind them that as children and you as parents, you're the first role model they have in living out biblical truths. Finally, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he shall not depart from it. I know the bell's rung, but I want to open it up. Last chance. Questions, comments, anything I missed, any other advice, counsel that you would give based on those? Yeah. Let's talk about age, whatever's age appropriate, okay? I'm going to close with a prayer.